Hello and welcome to Bottom Line. I'm Cindy Keynes. We have a very informative show for you today. We're going to be learning about the School of Health Sciences at Oakland University. And I'd like to welcome my guest for today's show. She's a special instructor there and a registered dietitian, Sarah Martin. Sarah, welcome to Bottom Line.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to understand more about health sciences and especially, maybe talking a little bit too about, nutrition 101, so to speak. But to start off with, if someone's watching the show and they'll ask the question, what is health science? What is a health science degree maybe from Oakland University?
Sure. So, health sciences, that's a pretty broad subject, right? The science of studying health, how to improve your health, how to live a healthier life. And certainly in Oakland University, there's several majors you can study within the School of Health Sciences. There is a degree, though, of health science within the School of Health Science. And that degree really looks at just how to live a healthier life, how to kind of join the science of health along with behaviors and community settings to improve that health. So, kind of combines basic science, social science, and health science to create what is the best way to bring that health into our community and into our individual lives.
And that sounds amazing, bringing everything into one. And so, also to kind of formulate in our minds, what kind of careers would somebody pursue once they have a health science degree?
It's really such a wide range of careers that you can launch into. So, in health science, you can specialize, and in the School of Health Sciences, there's so many majors that you can focus on. You can, of course, focus on nutrition, like me, and become a dietitian. You can focus on exercise science. You can gear your knowledge towards more clinical diagnostics, more. You can certainly look towards other wellness promotion, things like that. With a health science degree specifically, it's really geared towards working in the healthcare field without having to go into something specific necessarily, like going on to get a doctorate or going on to achieve a clinical role, more a support health role in the healthcare field. It's also a great degree to go into furthering your career towards a clinical degree. So, say for instance, someone wanted to go into med school, go into dental school, go into physical therapy school. A health sciences degree is a great springboard for any of those advanced degrees, as well as provides an opportunity to launch right after getting your undergraduate bachelor's degree and work in the healthcare field.
Wow, what's really amazing is all those fields you can go into, which is kind of wonderful because you can just, move this way, that way, however you want. It's kind of a great, springboard to go on to something else too, as well.
I love it for students because it really allows them to learn a lot about health and kind of find what they're interested in rather than saying like, oh, I for sure want to do this one thing. It really provides the opportunity for students to learn about exercise science, about nutrition, about the basics of health science, how that can then play into their future careers and helps them focus on what actually interests them and what interests them about health.
Exactly. And like you said, they can start learning about that and figuring out this is an area I have more of an interest in or less of an interest. And then be able
Exactly.
to focus in on that. And I
Mhm.
know today we're going to kind of focus a little bit more, like you were saying, in nutrition. And you being a registered dietitian, I think we're going to kind of pick your brain today to
Oh, I love
understand,
it.
yeah, understand more about nutrition and what might you be teaching in some of those classes. And I'm curious too, because I know they talk about in health science, like there's the food science and then there's food service. Does that also fall under what you have been teaching and instructing?
Yes, so I teach a wide range of classes, which I love. Of course, I teach nutrition kind of 101, basics of nutrition and human health. But I also teach food science, where I take knowledge about food and really try to help students understand how this food can be changed into recipes, how it can be used to improve health, and what is making this food. So really kind of delving into the food itself. And then we also learn about food service, and this is more geared at how food is used in hospitals and healthcare settings to improve health. And we even go further with how food can be used in the workplace setting or in corporate settings to improve health, and not just putting it on an individual, but really looking at as so much of our food is eaten away. About 1/3 of our food is eaten away from home. How can we use that to our advantage to help improve health and not just say every time you eat away from home, it's unhealthy?
Right. And there are some great choices when you have to eat away from home. So it is a challenge. It's hard to eat healthy sometimes, we're all human. If we talk about food science first, I find that really fascinating when you mention, how you work with food and how food becomes into our meals. What do you find maybe most fascinating that your students maybe didn't know that you start to teach them about in food science?
That's a good question. Most fascinating, I think, is I guess kind of wading through all of what I call the nutrition myths and nutrition beliefs. So I always think it's fascinating, for me personally, of how many things are out there that are really just not founded in anything other than hope. And trying to make sure my students, not just telling them like, oh, this is correct and that's not correct, but really helping them understand the why. Why, for instance, our body uses carbs, right? And how that happens in our body, and trying to understand the difference between carbohydrate types and how our body will use them. And then also how those carbohydrate types change and interact in different foods, and how you can make them really delicious. And you don't have to just use tons and tons of sugar for something to be delicious, how you can actually use that knowledge to make something really yummy and tasty and just awesome.
And it's interesting you mentioned carbohydrates. So I have to kind of ask the question, we've heard of simple, we've heard of complex, and carbohydrates, we know those are a lot of the areas we love because it can be bread and pasta and, all that good stuff. Can you help us understand a little bit about the difference between maybe simple and complex, and what might be better for us and why?
Sure. So simple in like the most basic definition, and this is more the sciencey definition. Simple is going to be anything that is a single or two carbohydrate molecules. So that might be two sugar molecules, two glucose molecules stuck together, and that's a simple carbohydrate. In the terms of food, this is things like sugar, honey, in processed food, it might be soda, it might be baked goods, it might be anything that's using a sweetener. You also find simple carbohydrates in things that are naturally occurring, like fruits, as well as things like vegetables, starchy vegetables. You might get some simple kind of sugary carbohydrates in there. Now, complex carbohydrates aren't necessarily better for you. Complex carbohydrates is just multiple sugar molecules, so many glucose molecules. And that might be found in things like rice, pasta, bread, grains. And there's no good, bad that I like to use in my language on food. So, of course, if you're someone who is a marathon runner, those simple carbohydrates certainly are good for you, especially to power through those marathons, right? If you're someone who's running around all day and needs a little nibble of fruit, that's certainly a good carbohydrate to be using. Now, what makes something a little bit healthier is how much fiber it has and how unprocessed it is. So you can have a really healthful, simple carbohydrate, like a piece of fruit, maybe a banana or a kiwi or something like that, that also has some great fiber in it. And that fiber is going to help digestion, that helps with your microbiome, it helps regulate blood sugar. It's a really good nutrient to eat. Where a complex carbohydrate like white rice might really be a good amount of carbohydrate, but not necessarily have a lot of fiber. So the difference is just how many molecules of carbohydrate is. In food, though, it's going to be the difference of, can you add some fiber to that? Does it have fiber? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It does. And I think that was really a great way when you mentioned, what simple and complex is. It's just multiple molecules, coming together. And if we talk about maybe what is the latest when it comes to when I think of carbohydrates and fiber, I also think about when we talk about sugars and fats and things like that. And what's the normal plate size now that maybe we should be thinking about, or what portions of our meals should be partly carbohydrates or fats and so forth. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the good and bad fats.
Okay, that's a good question. I like the way you put that. Like, what portion of our plate? Um, you know, there's no one size fits all in nutrition. So every person has different needs. And certainly if you're someone who is really active, you're going to have higher needs for carbohydrates. So I don't like to be so prescriptive, say the perfect plate. If I could tell you the perfect plate, I would say making half that plate non-starchy vegetables is ideal. So that's things like spinach, leafy greens, peppers, tomatoes, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, green beans. Non-starchy vegetables should be about half the plate. And then the other quarter of the plate can be more carbohydrate rich foods. So that would be things like starchy potatoes, maybe some whole grains, brown rice, whole wheat pasta, things like that. That would be a good kind of format for that. And then the other quarter of the plate might be more of a lean protein. So things like beans, things like fish, shellfish, lean proteins like chicken and turkey, things like that. That'd be another good quarter of the plate. So when you look at your plate, looking at it and saying, do I have mostly vegetables? Do I have about a quarter carbohydrate foods and about a quarter proteins? And that's a good gauge for most people.
Right. And I think that's extremely, that helps, visualize, where we should be with our plate. And again, like you mentioned, nutrition and the way people eat, it's going to be, specialized to what they need for each of their day. But if we do talk about that, when we talk about eating, can you help us out maybe at the beginning of the day, and how should we approach eating throughout the day? I know there's always the exceptions, as you said, with somebody like a marathon runner, but if it's a student who's getting ready for classes in the morning or someone getting ready to go to work for the day, how should they start thinking about their day of meals?
That's a good question. It's really that is can be a little more culturally defined of when you should be eating. So that's very that has differences between cultures, and I always would love people to stick with whatever culturally appropriate meal times they have been grown up with. Now, as far as making sure you're getting enough is a struggle for a lot of students. So I have, for instance, a lot of students who struggle to wake up in the morning, get to class barely in time, and they skip breakfast, and so they're super hungry. And then they like pound something at 1 o'clock for lunch that isn't the healthiest. So I always really encourage my students to try and have something prepared in the morning to eat that has protein and fiber. So something like a Greek yogurt or cottage cheese with a little bit of fruit, or perhaps even throwing in a bar in their bag if they're unable to eat a full breakfast, or trying to eat a breakfast that maybe even if they are able to prepare at home, eggs with a bit of spinach or salsa to keep them going. So always trying to have a little bit of protein and fiber with each meal. And if you're someone who eats 3 meals, that's great. Trying to have that protein and fiber every few hours keeps you fueled. And then trying to do small snacks, a piece of fruit, maybe a bar with some nuts and grains, just small things to keep you going throughout the day. Ideally, not getting so hungry that you make what I would call very poor food decisions when you're so hungry. We've all gone to the grocery store and been so hungry, all of a sudden we walk out with like 2 cases of donuts and like Fruity Pebbles, and you're like, what was I thinking? So trying to make sure that you stay full enough that you're making insane food choices that you later say, why did I do that? But also not overeating. And one of the key things is trying to eat as little processed food as possible. So trying to plan out that you have whole food things and not so much, oh, I ate a sugary cereal for breakfast. And then for my snack, I had like a meat stick. And then for my lunch, I had some ramen noodles, really having all that processed food. That's the thing that I like to stay away from. So as far as timing, whatever is culturally appropriate, as long as you're getting enough to not be starving, that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and like you said, there's some times when we make some bad choices when we're starving. I think that's why they always say too, don't go grocery shopping when you're hungry, because you might.
I get that recommendation all the time. Try not to go when you're hungry.
Exactly. That looks good. That looks good. So it's and I think what you said is what people have been used to as they grow up in culture in their society and whatever has worked for them before. But like you said, it's tough, and and like you said, if there's something they can have a little bit with protein to kind of keep them going, so you don't get to that point that you're starving and so forth. And that brings something to mind for me that I always think about is, can you kind of comment, Sarah, maybe on this whole, if you can choose to get something fresh or frozen or canned, how can someone, are all those good options if it's what you can have at home and, what's in the cupboard, or at least it's better than maybe something else? Can you kind of comment on those type of things? If you have frozen vegetables or, fresh, of course, but is canned bad unless you rinse off some of the sodium water it's in, like I do, or I try to, but maybe you can help us understand how that all works.
Sure. So, you hear that frozen and canned are not as good, and there are some nutrients that are lesser. So, when you start to process food, you lose nutrients, and mainly you're losing water soluble vitamins when you process food. So things like um, B vitamins and vitamin C. When you start to heat and cook and process foods, those things can actually kind of come out of the food and be degraded. So you don't get as much. So as far as canned food, you might have a little less B vitamins because you do lose some water soluble vitamins. However, you still have the same amount of fiber. You still have the same amount of macronutrients. And you might have a little excess sodium, but like you said, you can rinse it off. I never like to tell people to stay away from frozen or canned food because they are such economical choices, and they also really help if you haven't been to the grocery store in a week and you don't have fresh food. They're a really good pullover so you don't end up going and getting a fast food that's really much less healthful. Now, what you do want to try and stay away from is the ultra processed frozen and canned foods. So, for instance, a canned garbanzo bean or some canned plain bean. You can have that on hand and say, a dish I made the other day, for instance, I had like nothing in the cupboard. So I took some beans, I rinsed them off, and I sauteed some garlic and onion, and I did tomatoes and just some milk in there, and kind of made it a creamy tomato sauce with beans in it, and ate that as just my lunch. That would be much healthier than, say, if you were to get just a canned soup or a creamy canned soup. It has really high sodium, pretty high fat, and a lot of additives that just aren't great for you. So trying to use canned food and frozen food that might be one or two ingredients, opposed to the canned food or frozen food that is the whole meal frozen in a bag that you just heat up. That ultra processed food is what you want to try and reduce. And it's not so much the frozen or the canned, it's just how processed it is. And the more you can do more homemade, even if it's simple homemade, like I said, a can of beans sauteed with some onions and tomato sauce and milk. I mean, very simple, but still good. And it's not going to have that super high sodium, super high saturated fat that you see with a lot of processed foods.
Makes a lot of sense. And in sounds, and it's easier to make and something you can make. Like you said, you made yourself for lunch in that. Is there, as we think about, some of the foods and whether it's fresh or frozen, canned, or is there some myths out there of foods that people have always said, oh my gosh, I thought that was healthy and it's not, or vice versa, where we didn't think it was healthy and it actually is for us? Is there some out there that you could maybe give us examples of?
Yes. So let me say, so I do nutrition counseling as my side hustle, my mad money.
Yeah.
And so an example of someone today, I was working with a client who, lives in a large body, and they're saying how they were eating a ton of cheese because they thought that was a really good choice for them. And cheese, I think, is one of those ones that people really think is a healthier choice, or a lot of people I have worked with say they think it's a healthier choice, where a lot of cheeses are super high saturated fat, pretty calorically dense. So I'd say cheese is one.
Okay.
A lot of breakfast yogurts, those are on my hit list of what
Yeah.
I don't care for because they actually have this very high amount of sugar in them. If you flip that breakfast yogurt around, you can find 23, 24 grams of sugar in it, which is actually the recommended limit for what the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association recommends to stay under for a woman each day is about 24 grams of sugar. So one of those yogurts hits your total. And to me, they're not even that good. So I was recommending
Right.
sweet yogurt. I think that's one that always parades around like it's healthy, and it's not. Some of the grab and go bars, I don't like to name brand names, but some of them, the like granola bars that are, I guess, pretty much a candy bar parading around with some oats in it. I'd say those are some good ones that people
Avoid
get a little
those.
confused with. Um, so those are some ones that I say those often confuse people on, oh, I thought it was good for me. Oh, I can keep going. This is a great question. I love this question. Um, a lot of the breads that say they're multi-grain or many seeds,
Yes.
they're white bread with seeds in it. And so that confuses people. They're not nearly as much fiber as a whole wheat bread.
Now, on that
That's a
one,
great
Sarah,
question.
should someone look at the package of the bread? And my understanding from some education I've had in that area might be that you look and make sure it says whole grain as the first ingredient. Is that what you should be
Yeah.
looking at for the ingredients on
Yeah.
the bread
Mhm.
bag?
Yes, you look for that whole grain. Oftentimes it will say it on the front, but you really want to flip it around. And if that first ingredient or two says whole grain blah or whole wheat or brown rice flour, that's going to be whole grain. Now, if you see things like enriched flour or just nothing, it says just wheat flour, you would assume that is a refined grain, actually.
Okay.
I think the key, though, is look at that fiber content. For bread, I like it to be at 2 or 3 grams of fiber at least per slice. 5 is ideal for a slice of bread, but that's pretty high. So trying to look at that fiber content is always really helpful to find a bread that is fairly healthy.
And if we talk about, we talked a little bit about some things with carbohydrates and, of course, some lean proteins and so on, but I don't want to miss out on what are actually considered good fats to do, or maybe there's certain fats we can use in cooking.
Sure. Yes. So fats are helpful for you. There a lot of people hear fat and they think bad. But including healthy fats really is a good idea. In fact, you actually want about 20 to 35% of your calories from fat. So almost about a third of your calories should be coming from fat. Now, healthy sources of fat, think anything liquid at room temperature. So if you think in your house, what is liquid at room temperature? You can see in your cabinet that might be, of course, our old classic olive oil. But canola oil is also fairly healthy. Avocado oil, sesame oil, all these things are good, healthy fats. Now, you specifically want to be higher in your omega-3 fatty acids. So you want to make sure that you're getting sources of fish oil. That might be fish, shellfish. You can also get this from flaxseed, chia seeds. Any seedy things are going to have really good healthy fats. Avocado has good mono and polyunsaturated fats, really helpful for you. So anything that is going to be liquidy at room temperature. Now, not so healthful fats would be the opposite, solid at room temperature. So butter, you can think of the fat in bacon, you can think of the marbling in meat. All those are solid at room temperature. And what that indicates, it's high in saturated fat. Now, that saturated fat is the fat that has been associated with developing health conditions like heart disease and diabetes, where you really want to limit the saturated fat from red meat, processed meat, cheeses, butter, things like that.
I think that's a great rule of thumb. You know, what's liquid at room temperature? That's really easy. And again, a visual thing to say, you can look at something and see it's liquid or if it's not liquid. Is
It's
there
not
one?
always true, but
Yeah.
fish is solid at room temperature, but that's a healthy fat. So I do always like to give the caveat. That's just a light rule.
That's right. Okay. No, I can appreciate that. Is there any cooking method that's better than others? If someone could choose
Sure.
one or two?
Sure. You know, I love cooking so much. It's really my passion. So, there's you can make anything healthy by cooking, and the best way is to use things that are going to use the least amount of fat. And I know I just said fat is healthy for you, but a lot of foods naturally have fat in it. So adding a lot of fat isn't the best for cooking. So things like frying in just even this much oil can add a lot of fat. So even if you're like, oh, it's just a pan fry, that can add a lot of fat. Breading things tends to add a lot of calories. So that's not the best cooking methods. What you do want to do is use things like if you do have an air fryer, those are excellent. Of course, you want to use an air fryer, but not use a lot of breading and coating. So an example of some silliness is my father-in-law was so happy to tell me that he's been air frying and he's just been eating tons of chicken wings. The skin on chicken tends to be pretty high in saturated fat and cholesterol, so it's not the best even if you air fry it. Where if you wanted to air fry something like a piece of piece of white fish to put it in a nice healthy fish taco, that would be a great use of it. So making sure if you're doing an air fryer, not doing a lot of breading. And then if you're using the top of the stove, just spritzing with oil instead of pouring in the oil. So doing an oil spritz. And then if you're using the oven, trying to do, again, spritzing with oil and doing the oven to crisp up rather than to kind of soak in with all of that fat. That makes sense. So trying to just do light amount of oil and really trying to stay away from that breading.
Right. So the idea of maybe less is better. Just a little spray on there if you can.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I would be amiss not asking the question of the role of water in being, nutritious and the amount of water maybe we should drink, or how can we get water from certain things? Is it okay to consider some water from coffee or something, or is it best just to get it as plain water? Maybe you could comment a little bit on the water situation.
Sure. This is something, oh man. So as I said, I do work with a lot of people with nutrition counseling. This is one where I have a lot of hard time not being like, oh my gosh, just drink water. So water is best. Water is very good for you. I have had people have some nutrition myths come up that you need to add electrolytes or you need to add things to water. You don't. Water is best for you. And the amount varies based on how hot it is, how much physical activity you have. The best rule of thumb is to drink water throughout the day and try to aim for when you urinate to have just a lightly colored and not have a super dark color. And that's kind of the best rule of thumb to make sure you're hydrated. As far as what to drink, water is best. You can be hydrated with coffee and tea. That caffeine won't kind of overpower how much water is in there. So it is a diuretic, but you're not going to end up losing more water than you're drinking. So they do hydrate. What's key is that you don't add a whole bunch of sugar. So adding sugar is what can make it less healthy. And trying to avoid drinking sugar is really a good idea for most people. So if you are choosing a coffee or tea to hydrate, making sure that it doesn't have the added sugar is key. Now, as far as the flavor packs, I know a lot of people love the flavor packs. I would say trying to drink clean water is best. A lot of those flavor packs have non-nutritive sweeteners and additives in it that seem to really not be great for gut health. And so we want to make sure our microbiome is always being taken care of. So if you can, trying to drink plain water and not using the flavor packs is great. However, if that's something that keeps you away from drinking soda and really high sugary things, that's probably better than drinking sugar. So it's kind of that hierarchy of what's best, but always water is on top.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I can appreciate that. Like you said, sometimes people have to flavor the water to be able to drink more of it. And so it's better than, like you said, some other sugary drinks. But well,
Yeah.
Sarah, thank you so much for telling us all about the study of health sciences at Oakland University. Thank you so much for giving us really a crash course here in nutrition and areas, and really appreciate your time today and your expertise.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I hope this kind of gives a little extra information about nutrition. And for anyone interested in becoming a dietitian, I can't say enough of how much I love being a dietitian. I love the field of nutrition. And I'm so excited that we offer a dietetics program at Oakland University where you can pursue that dream of becoming a dietitian.
Well, again, Sarah, thank you so much. And I thank you all for watching the show. I'm Cindy Keynes. I wish you the best of health.